Thanks, Steve, and thanks everyone for attending today and for the opportunity to come and speak with you. I will just start by saying there's a risk I've forgotten the content of my slides at the outset, so I will turn around from time to time just to check that I'm still on the right path. I did want to, I guess, just kick off by addressing some of the things I found from the first session, which I think really resonated with me, and also link into sort of why bother with risk management. And one of the things was the question that was put to the panel about what's the key thing that we need to be thinking about as business owners for 2021. And I think the answer that was coming out was that it's about planning, and it's about business planning, and I see risk management being a really core component of business planning. As business owners, you have different objectives when you start a business, whether or not they're financial, or they could be community or social aspects to doing it. But ultimately, you set your objectives, and you want to be able to reach those objectives, and risk management is one of the fundamental things that you can do to help that along the way. There's some interesting themes. I think planning was one of those things that came up, collaboration, pivoting. There's been unprecedented change over 2020 from a technology, from a way that we do business point of view. That introduces areas of risk. So I thought when Sam asked whether I'd like to be involved and to talk to the topic of risk, I thought, well, how do I make the fascinating topic of risk interesting, try and bring it to life, and give you some practical tips. So I kind of put my consultant's hat on and say, well, how do I address a project when I started? What are the things that I think about? What are some of the tools and tips along the way? And perhaps the last thing before I launch into my slides, which I was thinking about as I listened to a lot of the comments from the first session, and with that theme of planning in mind, is it actually costs us nothing as business owners to do that planning, and just to take some time to really think about objectives, what can get in the way of those objectives. So not a big cost barrier to consider, or CapEx. So in terms of a bit of an agenda, talk about what is risk and what does it mean for business. Identifying types of risk. So I'm a pretty process-driven person, so I like to put things in categories and boxes to kind of help me in my thinking, and that's sort of the process I would encourage people to go through as well, and create something conceptual. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Risk number 2, as well as me forgetting my lines, that you might not be able to hear me. So creating your risk radar is the other thing. It's a sort of conceptual way of thinking about identifying your risk environment and the things that can impede your objectives. How do you prioritise risks? Measuring what they are, creating a risk register, which is some tools that go into the Facebook forum afterwards to be able to support that. How do you adjust your approach? And I think, as I said, it's been a year of change for many organisations. Risks don't stand still. It's the type of process that we encourage people to be thinking about, and how do you adjust your approach and consider new factors, and what sort of resources are there to help you. You're not in it alone when you're thinking about these sorts of things. So a bit about risk, and there's, I think, this idea that it's all doom and gloom. Risk, it's when things go wrong. It's when bad stuff happens. The possible event that could cause harm or loss. That's probably a more formal definition. There's actually a risk management standard, an international standard that we rely upon to make sure that when we think about the risk management process, we do it in a structured way. And basically, it puts the definition as it's the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So it's not necessarily a downside. It can be an opportunity. It can be thinking about changes or opportunities that you have in your business and setting objectives around those. But there's a whole lot of uncertain things that can happen, as this year has proven, bushfires, pandemic, that can, stop you reaching your objectives. So it's that pre-planning to think broadly about what those sorts of uncertainties are and how they're going to impact on your objectives, and then having some plans for how to deal with that. I said sort of at the beginning, the reasons why people go into business can be many and varied. It can be, financial considerations. It can be community or social sort of considerations that you have. Whatever your objectives are, I think you need to think about that in the context of your business, and also think about what are the specific things that can get in the way of those objectives when you're managing risk. So really thinking about what it means to you, and what the way that you measure risk really needs to recognise what are the important things for you. There's different ways of sort of categorising and putting criteria to that, which we'll go into. A few other examples there: workforce, wanting to be able to create a workforce and have employees and giving them a good place to work and a safe environment to work. That can be some other objectives. Customers, making sure they're satisfied with services or the products that you're providing. And then other kinds of risk can be around reputation. It's not always just the financial aspect, but also can be things that happen that cause damage to reputation as well. A couple of things there. Because we're all unique businesses and we're all exposed to different kinds of things, what we've said at the top there is there's some typical categories, and that can be a handy way for businesses to think about what the risks are in their business. Sometimes financial, can be operational. If you operate plant equipment, if you have things that break down, if you're perhaps exposed to natural hazards or those kind of things. Business owners have to operate in what is increasingly becoming a more complex legal and regulatory environment as well. So thinking about those kind of aspects. Health and safety I've touched on, and reputational. So how do you stop and identify what's relevant in your business? And we've kind of used this idea of a risk radar. So we think about the different quadrants here on the diagram. There's operational risk, strategic risk, so if you're planning on new activities, new services maybe, financial, cash flow, cost of finance, and then external threats such as weather or pandemic, those kind of concerns. Start to just use this as a bit of a framework to almost plot what are the things that you see in those particular areas. So I think one of the challenges we see for small businesses, the time to put into a formal sort of process is often sort of missed. We get busy working in our businesses, not on our businesses. So really, what's a really quick and easy way to start to get things out, put them on paper so that you don't lose sight of them? I think that was one thing actually that resonated with me from Rich's comments in the first session. Was it's really easy without a plan to just see 3 or 4 months go past, and actually there's been no action taken. So what we try and do when we're helping our clients is basically saying what's a really quick way of getting your thoughts out and documenting them on a piece of paper so that you don't lose sight of them. So it'd be interesting just to use this diagram, and I put my thinking cap on for 5 minutes about what a risk radar might look like for, say, a winery. So you have operational risks, product quality, workplace injuries. You could have a fire or a breakdown of a piece of equipment, all operational kinds of risks in a winery kind of context. You've got your funding, cash flow, expense management on the financial side. Strategic, you've got competitors that are out there that are all, providing similar sorts of services and trying to find their point of differentiation, new activities or expansion. So it's not a new thing by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of businesses in the region that have been a historic cellador and wine production are now investing into facilities for events and hosting large-scale events, and with that comes new risks. So thinking about those kind of expansion or pivoting for want of a more 2020 sort of term, introduces risks, new products, and then external things. So you can have negative publicity if someone has a bad experience. You've got your smoke damage, bushfire, all of those sorts of things as well. Just as an example of how to think about how to categorise some of the risks to your businesses. And then prioritising risks. And this is just an example of how you can start to take what's on that radar and say, well, what are the big ticket issues that I really need to be focused on in my plans for 2021 versus the things that you almost inherently know that you manage those things anyway, but giving it some structure so that you can keep on track with that. So examples here: financial criteria, operational, health and safety, legal, regulatory, reputation. This gives you a sort of a framework to think about how would I say a reputation issue is a catastrophic issue versus something that's negligible. So we use the example there. If you make the front page of the news or on the 5 or 6 o'clock news, that's likely to be a pretty major reputational impact versus someone makes a complaint, you hear about it and you deal with it. So just putting some criteria around how to measure those things and take that radar and start to put that into an easy to work through list. And these sorts of criteria should be set in the context of the scale and operations of your own business. Normally when we manage risks, we think about the consequences of a risk and the likelihood of that happening, and that's the combination that kind of gives us the priorities for what really needs to be managed. So again, just some examples there of how to measure likelihood, something that's almost certain to happen, going to be a higher risk than something that's a pretty rare sort of an event. And then turning that into a risk register, which is really just a list of risks, some categories, and a bit of prioritisation. I think the important thing that I like to make mention of with doing that is that the end game is really to be able to take your priorities and create some action plans. So that far right example there, if we look at these couple of winery examples, strategic event there being a failure of a new venture hosting winery events. Can cause financial impact because you invest money into the business. It can cause a reputational damage if events don't go well. We've measured the consequences. That could be moderate from either a financial or a reputational point of view. It's possible. So I remember what we said, probably 1 in 10 year event, something like that. That makes it a high risk rating. But the important thing is to say, well, what are the things, now that we've considered what that risk would do to our business, what are we going to do to try and prevent that from happening in the first place? So thinking about having business plans formulated, doing SWOT analysis on the activities, I think an important thing is getting advice from experts. So, you know, the types of people that are presenting on, you know, tomorrow on HR issues, Joel on community and social engagement, those sorts of things, you can actually get a lot of information to feed into your plans for how to mitigate risks. I won't spend a lot of time because we're getting close to the end of my time slot, but adjusting your approach, go back to that point, business is dynamic, things change throughout the course of time, and we've seen a lot of that this year. So, you know, risks will change with that as well. So I think an important factor is just to consider putting time to actually having a formal approach to thinking about the risks as part of your business planning process. And just, as I say, costs nothing in terms of dollars, but putting some time in can actually go a long way to just helping with the planning and the preparation to avoid having unforeseen circumstances. Do it as part of annual business planning. If you're doing one-off projects, you can use the same sort of process. You can just change the context. If you're changing your business activities, and engage other people in the process. So I think the first time you do it, you might sort of think as business owners, we'll go through and try and think of it from the owner's point of view. But over time, as the process develops, you can get your staff engaged in the process. It builds awareness so that they also feel part of how they're contributing to managing risk. Your customers, I think, equally an important stakeholder. So it's not necessarily sitting down and doing a workshop with them to understand things, but really listening to customer feedback and how that can inform your risk management process is really a helpful thing to do. Suppliers, if you're in that kind of business where you've got supply chains to manage, you can get some really useful insights into areas of risk in your business through your supply chain, and using accountants and business advisors to help in that process as well. And if you're part of associations and member groups, I suppose Orange 360 is probably a good example of that, but just learning from the membership around similar issues that they're having, and really just thinking about that in the context of your own business. A couple of things just to finish off with. I mentioned the International Standard for Risk Management, that's ISO 31000. It's a great cure for insomnia for many people, but it actually gives you some really practical tips for how to go about the process that we've really just hit the tip of the iceberg of today. And then I found this excellent thing downloadable online. It's a guide to effective risk management, and it's really concerned a lot with how the people and the culture side of going through that process can be best dealt with, and it's sort of 12-15 pages worth of content, easy to get online, and I'd recommend that to have a look at as well. As I say, working with business advisors, so a lot of the people presenting here today have expertise in their fields and can be a really good source of information from work that they've done with other organisations and applying that in your own. Thanks very much for listening in.